You also have the ability to sort of go back into like history of conversations that you've asked. Here's an example of, hey, what is a shadow rule? I'm trying to understand what a shadow rule is. It comes back with a response. It gives you the sources and the links. What we've done here at Cisco is that we've solved an incredibly hard problem, a very hard computer science problem, in like being able to recognize, which application is sending what type of traffic, even, without decrypting those packets. So Encrypted, Visibility Engine, or EVE, is able to see that, whether it's, TLS or QUIC, protocol, recognize that, hey, this particular application is now, sending this type of traffic. It can recognize which operating system the application is running on, what browser it's using, what version, of the OS in the browser, what type of headers are on top of it, just by inspecting the handshake, just by looking at, the encrypted traffic itself.
It's a bit scary, I think, because, ChatGPT writing a letter or writing some poem or something is one thing. But AI writing firewall rules that could affect a company is like a next level of like seriousness.
I think we're going to go through that same phase of like, a lot of skepticism to like, wait, it's starting to be useful. I'm starting to use it every once in a while, to like, I'm starting to use it every day, to like, I completely trust it to do its job. I think we'll see that same transition happen here as well. And we're just at the beginning of that curve.
Hey everyone, it's David Bombal back with a very special guest. DJ, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
So DJ, can you introduce yourself to the audience? You've got a great story, an announcement as well. But tell us a bit about yourself, and then tell us about this amazing announcement that I think is going to change a lot of people's lives.
Yeah, no, first of all, thanks for having me. This is super exciting to be here. I'm your classic, cliched immigrant. Came to this country, United States here, almost about 20 years ago, $800 in my pocket, dreams of conquering the world. Got a PhD in computer engineering, went to school at UC Santa Cruz, got a DARPA DoD grant, a Department of Defense grant, which means that I could work on some pretty cool projects, across the board. Spent some time at Berkeley, Media Labs at MIT. I worked out of a defense contractor called BB&T Technologies. And, part of my job was sort of building out communication protocols for drones. And, spent some time starting startups. I was a VP of engineering and chief architect, at a company, a startup called StackRox. Right after that, I started Armablocks. I was the co-founder and CEO. And at Armablocks, our hypothesis was this, right? We were sort of seeing this huge shift, that was about to happen with respect to natural language processing and natural language understanding. Yep. This is back in 2017, 2018, where, OpenAI was still a smallish outfit that had just broken out of Google. And we're talking about AGI. A lot of people are just looking at them going, hey, these people are wide-eyed, scientists that are just out there like wanting to build something brand new and different. But it still wasn't what it is today. But we sort of knew people in there. We're working with them, and they announced this thing called Transformers, which is really interesting, and we were like, hey, what does this transformer mean? We sort of saw the very first glimpse of, GPT or generative pre-trained transformer models, which fundamentally allow you to do a lot more interesting things with textual data. And that was our segue to sort of imagining what could be for cybersecurity. And so we sort of founded the company around that hypothesis that, AI is going to be very important for security and cybersecurity. And let's start, focusing on specific use cases. So the first use case we picked was email security. And so, and that really allowed us to understand and solve the problem very meaningfully. The company was ultimately acquired after 5.5 years into Cisco. As recently as about 3 months ago, and we're now inside of Cisco. I'm currently the VP of products for AI with the security business group at Cisco, and responsible for injecting AI into in the entire generative AI in specific into the entire portfolio. So it's a little bit about my background and what I'm doing right now. But yeah, it's really interesting times with respect to AI.
There's a lot of hype, right? ChatGPT really brought it to the forefront. I think it made it real for a lot of people. But I mean, you've been talking about how this changes business processes and security for a long time. And I mean, the companies the company that you created and companies you've worked in, this has been a journey.
Absolutely, you're spot on, right? I think it's not like a lot of times overnight transformations are talked about as truly being overnight. when it's actually been many, many years in the making. And I think, when you even reflect on just AI itself, right? AI has had, tons of AI winters, as like, a lot of researchers like to call it. There are these booms and busts that happen just based off of, where technologies and its adoption curves are. I think what's really, tremendously exciting about AI, especially with, what happened last year in November when ChatGPT came out of, was officially launched, was that it made AI accessible to folks like you and me that aren't like deep in the weeds of it, or like anybody that just wants to go up to a site and start using it, right? I think that really changed the way people thought about and perceived, what AI could do. So essentially, the large language models that powers the ChatGPT, powers those applications, I think it's really sparked people's imagination, drastically. And again, the core architecture, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more architectures beyond just the transformers, but the core architecture really lends itself, well to like solving a lot of problems that requires a huge amount of human effort today.
The announcement, you better tell us about this announcement, because it affects a problem. I mean, I've been doing firewalls for way too long, showing my age. I remember for as long as it's ever been, firewall rules and stuff have been an absolute nightmare.
You're spot on, right? I think one of the first sort of conversations that we started having with folks inside of Cisco, and as Cisco Security, when you take a look at one of the largest offerings that we put out there is a Cisco Firewall, right? And the firewall really moves the needle from a business perspective, but also for all of the customers that we sell firewalls to, it is a must-have. It's not it's an aspirin. It's not a vitamin, right? That they absolutely need the firewall to be there. One of the challenges with something like that is that it's extremely, it's a very complicated, complex, piece of equipment. When you think about what a firewall can and cannot accomplish, it's basically consuming traffic that's going in or out of your environment at speeds that are, that have to support any and every application. And any type of outages or any type of problems that happen can potentially affect millions, if not billions of dollars of revenue, for a business. So it plays a very critical function, and it's a very complex piece of equipment, and whether it's in software or hardware. And so it becomes really important to sort of think about what the future of that looks like. And part of the charter that we have is to fundamentally redefine, reshape that. And there's a tremendous amount of momentum and excitement that's happening inside of Cisco that's fundamentally changing what the future of this is going to look like. And so as part of the announcement, one of the big things that we're going to announce, and we're actively announcing, is the AI assistant for the firewall. And it's one of the first of its kind. I'm sure you've heard of Copilot. You've heard of, Microsoft talking about Copilot. You've heard of other folks, talking about some of those experiences. But what we're bringing to the table is fundamentally different. We're saying, hey, we are going to launch an AI assistant that understands the policies, understands rules that are inside of a firewall. On top of that, we're able to understand how to troubleshoot, how to provide step-by-step instructions to manage that firewall, and provide additional visibility into your policies, and also give you the ability to troubleshoot, your firewall much easier, faster. The key thing to sort of think about this is it's like, hey, is there going to be an AI assistant for each part of the security portfolio or security product? And that's where I think we have fundamentally, taken a step back and said, hey, this needs to be reimagined. It's not going to be, an AI assistant for a firewall, an AI assistant for your XDR. It is going to be a unified assistant, for the entire security cloud. Right. So, from an experience perspective, you as a customer, you're fundamentally, you're changing the way you're interacting with your security suite of products, right? You're going to use natural language to ask a simple question. Hey, I want to block this traffic from going out to, xyz.com. And the assistant basically parses that, knows which APIs to call, constructs the rule for you, comes back and lays it all out, which makes your life a lot easier as an analyst or as a firewall admin. And most importantly, like when you think about the natural behaviors, you mentioned that you've played around with firewalls yourself, and so have I. I've actually built firewalls in a different company before, in part of my journey here. The interesting thing is you'll notice that people that use the firewalls, they don't want to normally change rules or policies once it's been deployed, right?
You might break something, yeah.
Exactly. You might break something, and you don't want to be the person that gets fired for changing a small rule somewhere, right? So I think what ends up happening because of that is that you've got tons and tons of rules, rules on top of rules and policies that are now sitting out there. We've actually talked to a bunch of customers, and a lot of them actually have hundreds of thousands of rules, and some of them even have millions of rules, and that becomes really hard to manage. And so we're leveraging AI, and the AI assistant now has the ability to get a lot more smarter about the policy itself, right? It has the ability to go back and reason and say, hey, hang on a second, you're trying to add a new policy. Guess what? You already have a policy that looks a lot like this. Maybe you just need to create an object and attach it to this policy, right? And then, you as an admin, you go, oh, wait, I didn't have a policy for that. Oh, that's great. I had a rule that almost had all of the right objects. I just had to create a new AD group and attach this person to it. Great. I'm just going to say yes to this. We want to simplify and create that experience. And that's really magical for the firewall admin. But again, it doesn't stop there. We're tying that seamlessly across the board. But I think, just taking a step back for a second, as you think about the announcement itself, why should a customer care about this becomes, a thing, like a practitioner. Why should an admin, get tremendously excited? So let me just take a minute, if you don't mind. I'll just set up, a basic sort of a framing or a frame of reference of how we at Cisco are thinking about this, right? When you sort of see this, the way we're talking about this, we keep customers at the center of our conversations, right? So if you're a customer, you're wondering, why should I care about AI? The very first thing that comes to mind is the fundamental change in experience, right? You no longer are fiddling with knobs. You're using natural language to communicate with your security solutions. And so fundamentally, we're changing the experience of how users engage with security. The second part of it is really about the efficacy side of the house. Like, are we able to do things at machine scale? Because we want things that are security products that are able to detect things faster, quicker, better. And then ultimately, it's all about the economics. Like, can I do more with less? Because I don't have as many dollars to spend. I'm doing all of these things. How can I do more with less? And so those are the reasons why customers absolutely have to care about AI right now. The why quickly segues into, wait, great, I'm bought into this, but what is Cisco doing for me? And that's where you sort of get into the conversation of the what. And so we're breaking that down into three pillars, which is assist, augment, and automate. When we talk about assist, we're talking about AI assistants. We just talked about what we're announcing, what we're launching. AI assistants are fundamentally going to change the way that humans and machines interact. So we're launching that experience first, but then we're combining that with the ability to sort of correlate insights across the number of vast disparate signals that Cisco generates, right? Whether it's on the network or the email or the DNS, the endpoint, all of the native telemetry that we have, we want to be able to correlate. That's where the augment piece comes in, where we're able to augment human insights with machine intelligence. And the last piece is, of course, to automate, complex workflows that make the lives of security admins a lot easier. So those are the three pillars on which we're building technologies. And finally, when you break it down into how are we doing this, we break it into data, models, and governance. The data part really focuses on the telemetry that we're getting from different sources. The models are specifically focused on the third-party models, like OpenAI or Anthropic or Cohere. Or sometimes the open source models that we're using, or in fact the models that we are trying to start building ourselves, foundation models that are native to Cisco. So we're picking the best of breed among those models, and focusing on things that make the most amount of sense for the application that we're using. And ultimately, governance is important, right? Everybody cares about what type of data are we using. Is the data sanitized? Do we have the right type of guardrails in place, making sure no data is leaking? That's absolutely important to us. We are a security company, and at Cisco, we're a trusted business partner for lots and lots of enterprises. So responsible AI is absolutely non-negotiable. So that's sort of how we're thinking about the framing of the entire conversation, and we're launching specifically experiences in each one of these segments, as you can see.
So firewalls is just the beginning, right?
Firewall is just the beginning. I love how you put it, and it's absolutely just the beginning. And let me show you. One of the things that you just mentioned was that there's a ton of hype around this.
Yep.
And and it's hard because one of the interesting things about AI right now is that it's moving incredibly fast. Things are changing almost on a daily, weekly basis. A lot of times when you take a look at some of the demos that are online, it's interesting. It shows you the art of what's possible. It seems fascinating, But when you take the step from like a demo to like a product, it's a very different ballgame.
Yeah, you've got a demo, and I want to get to that. The audience, a lot of people are working with firewalls, and a lot of us have had like experiences with technologies over the years. And you mentioned Copilot. I think one of the concerns a lot of engineers will have is, can I trust this?
No, I think that's it's the number one thing, right? And when we do our own, conversations with our customers, and we're talking to the analysts, we're talking to practitioners that are using this on a daily basis. I think the number one thought that sort of crosses their mind is like, hey, I don't know, is this going to be safe? Is this not going to be, is this going to do the right sets of things? How do I think about this? How do I position this? There's a lot of thinking around that's sort of happening, and I think we've been very thoughtful about how we want to approach this, right? I think we've made sure that we're when we think about one of the common topics is really about hallucination, right? People say that if I were to ask it a question, is it going to come back with the right response? And so what we have done, with respect to hallucination, is that we've come up with a technology stack that uses something called grounding, where it is grounding all of its answers based on knowledge that you're pointing the large language model to, saying, hey, answer the question that I'm asking you from this repository of information or from this database. If you don't know the answer, don't make it up. And and the best part is, like, when you say that, it actually starts, behaving appropriately. It only comes back with the answers from the from the data store or from the knowledge base that it has. And so you're spot on. I think trust is the number one thing that we have to go out and solve for. And again, and as I walk you through the demo, you'll see that we're trying to build the right types of user experiences to sort of improve and enhance the trust that that they have. And the one point I'll just articulate before I dive into the demo is that it is a challenge, right? When you think about people getting on planes are by and large being driven by control systems that are powering the autopilot mechanism. The pilot's really watching for like abnormal things, but by and large the plane sort of flies itself. Trying to get that into a reality for cars has been a lot harder, because you now have like a much larger population as opposed to just the small group of pilots that are piloting aircrafts. You now have like vast majority of people that are still uncomfortable letting go of control, but it's starting to happen, with self-driving cars becoming a reality. I think we're going to go through that same phase of like, a lot of skepticism to like, wait, it's starting to be useful. I'm starting to use it every once in a while, to like, I'm starting to use it every day, to like, I completely trust it to do its job. I think we'll see that same transition happen here as well. And we're just at the beginning of that curve. So here's a quick view of what it is that we are building and then we will be announcing very, very shortly. Here's the Cisco Defense Orchestrator. We use the CDO to be able to control, manage your firewall rules, your policies. And what you're going to see over here is an instance where we've actually deployed the AI Assistant. You can see it right on top. You invoke it by clicking on a button. It pops right over. And this sort of has a UI and a UX that's easy to use, easy to understand. In this case, it looks a lot like what you might see from a ChatGPT, right? It asks you, hey, what would you like to ask today? Here's an initial setup guide. Here's an admin, super admin experience, access control. These are sample prompts that you can ask. So for instance here, what access control rules are disabled? You can click into it and it's going to come back with a response. You also have the ability to sort of go back into like history of conversations that you've asked. Here's an example of, hey, what is a shadow rule? I'm trying to understand what a shadow rule is. It comes back with a response. It gives you the sources and the links. What's interesting over here is that you've got, the ability to give feedback. So you can give it a feedback and you can say, hey, wait a minute, I was not happy with the response that just came back. And then you could give it a thumbs down. And then when you do that, it'll come back with a few options. You can say, hey, it was factually inaccurate. It was irrelevant. It was a problem with the citation and so on and so forth. And that automatically provides feedback that makes the models better. It's not just that, we're constantly, giving you answers where we know for a fact that, the answers that you see are mostly going to be right. But when they're not right, you have the ability to give feedback and make the models better. So that's really what we have, built into this. But, going back to the conversation, you can basically ask questions about a specific policy. It's like, hey, list all of the policies that are actively deployed. It comes back and says, hey, here are some of the policies that have been actively deployed. And then I can ask it a question to say, hey, can you turn this policy on? Can you set it to block? Can you give me a list of objects? Give me step-by-step instructions to make this change. And, we've also built the guardrails. Now, if you were to ask it a question about, hey, what is the weather like today? It's going to come back and say, hey, thanks for your question, but I'm a firewall expert and this is my area of expertise. So if you want to ask about the weather, you might want to try different websites to do so. So we've implemented those basic guardrails as well. So that's a quick view. You will have the ability to make this full screen if you want to, if you are constantly using it, which is what we like you to do. And if things work out well and it's sort of solving the problems for you, you would potentially put this on a second screen and start using this as your default way to be able to talk to your security products. And so and at the same time, when you're done with the work, you just close it out, and you can always invoke it back. It comes back the same way. You can move it around if you like it as a side right rail and experience. So you can just say, hey, pop it to the side. So we've made sure that from a usability perspective, it's got the right sorts of things.
We've been doing this for a long time. In the old days, it was CLI was the way that we managed devices. And then it's moved to like GUI. And this is just another iteration of an interface. Is that kind of fair to say?
It's a great point that you raised, right? I think you're spot on about how we're moving back to a text-based interface. But I think the fundamental shift, though, is that you don't have to learn a new language anymore. You don't have to learn how the CLI spec works. You can come and ask a question as you normally would. It's like, how do I create a basic security policy for FTD? And then you're off to the races. It breaks it down for you. It gives you the sources, so you feel confident that, hey, I can go read up the source. You can click into it to say, can I get more details on that specific link? And then you know exactly that, it's pulling all of this information from here. Imagine now this working across a portfolio of products. It's not just one product. It's like, your firewall, your XDR, think about, every single suite of products that are seamlessly now interfacing using a singular assistant. It starts to make a lot of sense from from where we are headed perspective. So this is today what you're seeing is for the firewall, and this is the big announcement. We are actively adding more capabilities. This is going to be launched in private preview for our customers that are using CDO and CDFMC, which is the Cisco Defense Orchestrator and the Cloud Delivered Firewall Management Center. And then we're rolling this out to the on-prem FMCs as well, which is really interesting, right? I think when you think about a lot of customers that are still running their firewalls on-prem, that are not connected to the cloud, we are still offering them the ability to leverage the AI assistant. By summer, they'll be able to start using this as well. So it really changes the game for all of the firewall users and admins. And our goal is to be able to give them a unified, a single pane of glass, if you will. But to your point, it's going to be a conversational interface.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think ChatGPT really brought it home to a lot of people, how powerful it is to have a chat interface. Before that, AI was this thing somewhere out there in the ether, but it kind of brought it home to a lot of people that you can configure stuff and get a lot of information just by chatting to a machine.
You're spot on, right? I think that is the big game changer, right? I think, and again, it's one of the interesting things that's happening from an evolution perspective is that we're starting to see multimodal responses, right? So it's not just a text-based response. It's able to come back to you, in a tabular format. You're able to now start providing it with pictures, and it recognizes what the picture is about, and it's able to respond back as well. So what's sort of happening, and again, the same thing's happening with voice to text, transcription as well. We're very rapidly sort of headed to the place where the conversational way of engaging with machines is going to become the default way of, getting things done. And, as much as it might seem unnatural to begin with, and that's like people are used to using keyboards, they're used to using a mouse. If you remember, there was a big transition from folks that just used a text-based interface to giving them a mouse and saying, hey, start to use the GUI. And there were people that were holding out saying, no, I'm going to still use my Emacs. I'm still going to use my WIM. Yeah. Right. And so we will have an initial phase of people saying, wait a minute, this feels a little unnatural, before they start to recognize that it is saving them a lot of pain. We've already done some user studies where the user research responses have come back, and you can see a marked improvement in the rate of learning for people that are not familiar with something. It gets them to a point of being productive much faster. But more importantly, for those that are experts as well, once they recognize that the system is doing what it's supposed to and their trust factor increases, they start using this more than going down and clicking on knobs, 5 pages deep. That they just trust the assistant to go out and execute on it over and over again.
The problem in cybersecurity, right, is we just don't seem to be winning. So it looks like the old way is just not working. And it sounds like we have to do this. We have no choice because we're overwhelmed. There's too many attacks. Companies are getting hacked every day. It sounds like we have no choice to rely on our manual way of doing things, right?
Absolutely. I think this is truly that moment in time where AI starts tipping the the battle in favor of the defenders, right? And that's really what we're seeing right now, because it is not cheap to be able to run inferences on models, which directly means that the economics for an attacker is fundamentally starting to shift. When you are able to correlate things at a speed faster than what humans are able to do, you are forever changing the way the economics of an attack happens. And so that's why this is incredibly interesting.
I just want to ask the questions that I'm pretty sure a lot of people are thinking about. Is the problem with ChatGPT, and I'll just use that as the example because it's like the poster child, if you like. Hallucinations you've addressed. So hallucinations are a big problem where it just makes up random stuff. And then the other thing is training data. I think a big concern about AI is what is it actually trained on? I think the one of the things about let's talk about ChatGPT because that was the example, but then we'll talk about the models that we're using as well. I think when you use ChatGPT, I think the interesting part of it is it's crawled the entirety of the web in some shape or form, right? But what we don't know and what they've not made public is what else went into it. Like what is the training sources? How do they curate the data? There's a lot of something called reinforced learning through human feedback that's gone in, or RLHF for short. It's basically humans sort of like curating the data set and changing the shape of the model to sort of respond appropriately. So there's not there's lower levels of toxicity, there's lower levels of hallucination and so on and so forth, right? So a ton of work has gone into building these models, and we're seeing a huge movement where open source models are starting to perform rather well, and the same thing is sort of happening with some of the small models as well, which are not quite as large as the OpenAI models, but smaller models that are effective and useful in being able to solve these problems. So we're seeing a brand new ecosystem of models emerge, and each one of them have different corpuses of data that they're training on. What's really interesting is being able to build domain-specific models that understand a specific domain starts to get tremendously interesting, right? When you think about a company like Cisco, we've got data coming in all the way, from the network to the, to the endpoints, through emails, through DNS, to like pretty much, there's data that's coming in across the board, and each, our ability to sort of like understand the data is rather unique, right? Because of all the things that we do. And so building custom models that sort of understand that data becomes an absolute requirement. So that's something that we are aware of, and we're making sure that when we look at that data, we're training in the right and the appropriate ways. We've got the right amount of guardrails implemented that make sure that there's no PII, PCI data inside of training data that we use. We have de-identified any customer specific information. Sometimes we actually don't even use customer data. We're actually creating synthetic data based off of the statistical properties of the data that we're seeing, and then using that synthetic data to be able to train the models to behave in a particular way, so that when you detect an anomaly, it's able to automatically sort of guess what that anomaly could potentially mean, and then use that to be able to effectively do the detection. So we're training data is really important, and as you think about companies that will become successful, companies that have a massive amount of data gravity will obviously become the de facto winners in this game, because it'll matter that you have unique algorithms, but it'll matter even more that you have access to proprietary data, and that's where we're very interestingly poised. Yeah, I think that's Cisco's huge strength. You've got all this data. That's because I think when I talk to people about AI and networking or AI and security, people say, look, the problem is like ChatGPT or whatever was just pulling the stuff off the internet. And I mean, you can't trust a lot of that stuff. At least, I mean, the difference here is you're using proper data for the specific domain.
That's right. And I think it's interesting, right? ChatGPT in itself, they've not only just pulled the data, but they've done a lot of work on top of it to be able to make it, really effective. So the way to also think about this is the models are good at being able to provide an explanation in natural language, in an English language that we can understand. But then there are other techniques called Retrieval-Augmented Generation, or RAG, which uses data from a database or a corpus of data from a knowledge base that is very specific to the questions that you're asking. When you are retrieving data from that RAG and then you're couch it in the context of the language model, you sort of now have the ability to, get the best of both worlds. So you can easily now use a model like ChatGPT, the equivalent of the GPT-4 model or the GPT-4 Turbo, which was just recently announced. You could use the latest and the greatest, but then you're grounding it on data that is very specific to what you have. So that really, the combination really makes a huge difference, to a customer, as they start using AI.
I think I want to talk about the you've got the AI-powered encrypted visibility engine as well, right? And then I want to come back to some of the concerns people have because I don't know how much time we got left. So could you tell us what that's about? Because that's really interesting. Because the big issue is I've got all this traffic coming in. Everything's encrypted these days. I mean, you try and do a network capture. It's all encrypted. How on earth do you know what's good, what's bad?
No, I think you're spot on. So going beyond the assistants, we're leveraging AI to be able to effectively, do detections. Right, being able to augment. We talked about assist, augment, and automate. The part where we're augmenting human intelligence here is by looking at the data packets that are going from point A to point B. But because they're encrypted, it's hard for you to be able to crack them open, and decrypting it is expensive as well from a compute perspective, all the way up into the to the application layer. What we've done here at Cisco is that we've solved an incredibly hard problem. A very hard computer science problem in being able to recognize, which application is sending what type of traffic, even, without decrypting those packets. So Encrypted, Visibility Engine or EVE is able to see that, whether it's, TLS or QUIC, protocol, recognize that, hey, this particular application is now, sending this type of traffic. It can recognize which operating system the application is running on, what browser it's using, what version, of the OS in the browser, what type of headers are on top of it, just by inspecting the handshake, just by inspecting, looking at, the encrypted traffic itself. And it's using a bunch of different methods inside it to be able to identify a malware that's sending traffic. We're using LSTMs, bidirectional long short-term memory, which is a technique in deep learning to be able to identify these signatures. And then on top of that, we're using naive Bayesian signatures as well to be able to recognize that, hey, this application is this fingerprint, and give it a certain confidence score based on what the classifier comes back with. All of this is interesting, but if you're just identifying, that's not going to be enough, right? You've got to be able to take an action on the traffic. What we're announcing is that we're effectively able to write rules inside of the firewall that blocks this traffic from a malicious, a process that could be running inside of an endpoint without you having to decrypt the traffic. And so think about what happens when a ransomware comes together, right? You have a process that's running inside of a device, and this device could be something that you could not run an endpoint agent on. It could be like a heart-lung monitor, or it could be a diabetic pump that shoots out insulin that's running a Windows operating system, and it's hard to install an endpoint agent. So which means you might have to if it gets a process that starts to encrypt things and start to behave like a ransomware, you have the ability to use those known signatures to block the traffic that it would send out to exfiltrate all the data out and create the ransomware part. You have the ability to stop that at the network level without doing anything. So it's a huge thing that we're doing, being able to block malicious encrypted traffic, from egressing outside of your environment.
In other words, you are able to see what's in the packets, even though you're not decrypting it.
Correct. We're able to use properties of the packet, the size of the packet, being able to see where it's originating, where it's terminating. We're able to extract, just by looking at the characteristics of the encrypted packets, we're able to determine, it's sort of where the secret sauce comes in, where it says, hey, we have now, we're now effectively able to, with a high degree of confidence, state that this packet belongs to this process. And therefore, we can start taking actions on them, on that entire session, on those packets, on the stream, and block the traffic from going out.
I would just want to address an elephant in the room for a lot of people. Jobs. Is there a future for me? You get the one side of the story out there that no one's going to have a job in 5 years or 10 years or whatever because AI is going to eat all the jobs. And then you've got the other side which says AI is nowhere near good enough to be deployed. And I mean, this is like a real world example. It's a bit scary, I think, because, ChatGPT writing a letter or writing some poem or something is one thing. But an AI writing firewall rules that could affect a company is like a next level of like seriousness.
No, I think that's it's an excellent question, David. I think the way to think about this is anytime there's a new technological epoch, there's a lot of things that change when that epoch comes together. If it weren't for the advancement of internet and us all collectively as a humanity embracing internet, you and I wouldn't be able to do this call,
Exactly.
on a web browser. Right. I think what's going to happen is, we're now basically looking at an epoch that's moved faster than any other epochs in the past, right? Because we now have an amazing distribution mechanism, which is basically the internet. And AI is able to move a lot faster because we have the connectivity that we need to be able to effectively distribute AI. In some ways, I think the reason for that fear might be because of the speed at which it's moving. But that said, I think it's about, I don't think it's, ever going to replace a human being. I think the way I sort of see it, personally, is that it's going to augment the human ability. It's going to provide us with, superhuman capabilities. We're going to be able to do tasks that used to take a lot longer, a lot faster right now. It's like, if you go back to spreadsheets, before spreadsheets existed, we would have to spend time writing complex, instructions or writing them on ledgers of like all the things that we had to do. Spreadsheets sped things up. It did not take away the jobs. It took away some different types of job, but it repurposed it into something a lot more interesting for the knowledge workers. I bet you that is what is going to happen. I think you're going to start to see, certain things about managing a firewall is going to become easier, which means you're no longer going to see firewalls with 6 million rules or 5 million rules out there anymore, because it's going to become easier to manage. It's going to become easier to, get in there, add a rule, and it's not going to require a master's or PhD in managing firewalls, right? So that part is going to get easier, which means you now have creative forces and energies being spent on other more interesting problems. And in the best part about humanity is that we always find more interesting things to go out and solve, and so that's really what we will see at the next turn. I don't think it's going to take away all of our jobs. It's going to make us really good at our jobs and give us better things to do.
I love that. It's a great explanation. I think the next question in 2024, what should I study? Or where do you, this is like a major shift and there's a lot of hype, and it's always nice to talk to someone who's an expert in the field to separate the hype versus like reality and like actionable things that I should do. So, perhaps you can just give us some guidance, like career advice, or, where do you think we should, if I want to study something, I should study AI, whatever that means. Like any idea, any like sort of guidelines, any advice?
No, for sure. I think what's sort of happening is that AI is moving out of the research labs into the hands of people that can use it. The minute you can actually access AI over an API call, you know that at this point in time, it's moved away from like researchers to developers and engineers that can build amazing experiences on top of those APIs. It sort of happened with the cloud as well. I'll use cloud as an analogy, right? Previously, if you had to build your own data center, you needed to know everything about how do I rack and stack each and every single one of my servers? How do I solve for power? How do I solve for cooling? You had to know all of that to be able to effectively build an application that runs on top of the data center. When what happened with the hyperscalers was that they provided you with a simple API call that allowed you to just deploy your application and everything got managed by itself. We're that same sort of phase of evolution where you don't need to know about every single matrix multiplication that goes on to be able to build or create these models. You have the ability to sort of come in and say, hey, I'm going to use the APIs to be able to build amazing experiences on top. So in some ways, instead of AI researchers, you're going to start to see a lot of AI engineers. And then along with this, you're going to see a lot of AI operations people that come along and say, hey, in order to make sure that the AI APIs are working properly, I have like machine learning ops or AI ops is going to become a thing as well. For people that are looking at specializing, it's sort of, you just have to pick which, part of that, gradient do you want to be? Do you want to be part of the research team? In which case you want to spend time learning about the core mathematical, foundations that go behind building, machine learning and deep learning models. If you want to be more of the AI engineer, then you start playing around with the APIs that are available for GPT, or playing around with APIs for Anthropic and like some of the other models that are coming out, understanding how to like build applications on top of them. And if you want to be on the operation side, being able to understand what it means to like serve a model, what it means to leverage the GPUs in a cost optimal fashion, all of those problems become a lot more interesting. So those are the spectrum, and that's sort of how I would break it down, and that's how I would spend time focusing on which areas to focus, which areas to spend time on.
I always advise people, ride the waves. And this is just another huge wave that can be life-changing, right? And you really enhance your career. I mean, the problem a few years ago is I had to go and get a PhD in math to try and understand any of this stuff and statistics and all the rest of it. I mean, a lot of us a lot of people watching this aren't at that level, but it sounds like it's now more available. Like you said, just with APIs, I could actually do something serious with AI.
Absolutely. No, I think that is the big shift that's happened right now. I think you're spot on right now. And I think, and that's where you're seeing a lot of interesting applications being built. All the way from ChatGPT is a classic example, but there are so many variations of tools like that's coming out of Bard, that's coming and that's being built on top of Anthropic, and each one of these experiences are going to change how we perceive technology fundamentally.
We've got ChatGPT as an example, and Cisco have got this new product, and this is obviously going to grow, but that opens up a whole ecosystem, doesn't it? Where if I write an application, I could interface with those APIs and create something brand new.
Absolutely, yes. It's the beginning of a new journey. Where we're going to start to see a whole lot of interesting suite of applications being built out. In fact, one of the interesting concepts that ChatGPT had was the notion of plugins, right? Being able to bring your plugin and then connect it into ChatGPT. It's sort of very similar to how Copilot is thinking about something called skills inside of the Microsoft ecosystem. We have a very similar perspective in terms of how we sort of see ourselves unifying this assistant across all of the security cloud. And you're going to see us talk a little bit more about that, as the weeks progress, as the months progress. But that's definitely on top of our minds in terms of how we can supercharge an entire ecosystem of capabilities on top of the assistants.
We're running out of time, so last question. Where will the world be in 5 years? Nasty question, but just to give people kind of where is it going? Where do you see it going?
No, it's going to be absolutely interesting, right? I think it's I don't have a crystal ball, but my instincts are that you're going to see compute and computational pieces fundamentally change. It's going to be less and less of keyboards and mouse and more of being able to, talk to Alexa and Siri's of the world. You're going to see a huge amount of intelligence come into day-to-day tasks, opening a browser, filling out a form. A lot of those things are going to go through fundamental changes. So in 5 years from now, you're going to see a very different modality of how you engage with, any type of compute. Any type of, the infrastructure that supports that compute is going to go through a huge amount of change. And I do believe that it's going to get very interesting, from purely from user experience and a usability point of view.
DJ, I really want to thank you. I know we're out of time. I really want to thank you for sharing, not just the scary stuff, but also a future for people and how things are changing. Thanks so much.
David, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for having me on your show.